Welcome into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out fullpresscoverage.com for this podcast, a bunch of other great podcasts and articles, usually inspired by me, that are written by John Sapichetti, usually that come up on this very show. So you never know what you're going to hear. Could be a next featured article on fullpresscoverage.com. Make sure you check out the YouTube version of the show at youtube.com/JetStryer. Today, we're going to start off with a team that has been very disappointing this year. And I think a lot of people thought were going to be really in the mix in the Eastern Conference. And that's the Miami Heat, Sap. Adding to that disappointment, and I think a large part of why they've underperformed this year has been the play of second-year man Tyler Herro, who in the bubble became like not an overnight, but an over weeks sensation. And I mean, was just tremendous, poised well beyond being a rookie, and looked like he was an emerging star player for Miami. This year hasn't gone well for Tyler Herro. He's hit that sort of dreaded sophomore slump that, players seem to experience. And there's a story out today, Sap, that was on the Inside the Paint podcast. I'm reading based off the whole version of it, based off of having not listened to it, but NBC Sports has reported on it. And basically, the Heat are concerned about Tyler Herro, Sap. This was from the podcast, again, the Inside the Paint podcast. Everybody's entitled to their own personal life, and we don't try to bring it up. There was a lot of stuff about Dwayne Wade when he played that the Heat was concerned about, but it's just the way that this has played out with Tyler Herro. And he's grown through some things. We know ultimately the team starts to get a certain level of concern. In this particular case, the team has been concerned now for months, and that's kind of where it's at. But they were concerned with players during the Big Three era too. But this one is a little bit different because Herro is 21. And the article sort of goes on to explain the Heat are concerned that Tyler Herro has sort of embraced the fame aspect of being a basketball player too much, and that his personal life is getting in the way of his on-the-court abilities and his on-the-court production. I know you haven't heard this story yet. What's your sort of first reaction to hearing it?
Well, it's really not a surprise, right? Because we're talking about someone who's 21 years old, now in his second year in the NBA. So there's wealth involved. You're also living in one of the coolest cities in America, in Miami. And if you have enough money, you can have an endless amount of great times in Miami. So obviously Miami's a tool that the Heat can use to recruit players, but also it's something that they have to keep an eye on as young players come to Miami, that they have to stay focused. We know that the NBA players, probably their two favorite cities are Los Angeles and Miami. They generally live in those two cities. They love to go there when there's maybe a gap in the schedule. Players will always show up to Miami. Maybe they don't play, but they'll sit on the bench, but they're not going to miss that trip. So that's a cool place to go. Yeah, it's a great place to go. Who doesn't like, Miami, Florida, specifically South Beach, especially for young, wealthy guys. So it's really not a surprise. So obviously you've got a strong organization there in Miami, right? Led by Pat Riley. They've built a really strong culture there. Eric Spoelstra, I think, is an outstanding coach. And then you've got some veterans on that team, notably Jimmy Butler. So I would think that Butler would be the guy who might be able to pull Tyler Herro aside and say, let's get focused here. You've got a lot of talent. You don't want to waste that by not having your priorities set on being a great basketball player. And Butler's someone who came from nothing. He was the last pick in the first round, I believe. Chicago Bulls, played at Marquette. He was homeless as a young guy, kind of disowned
Took him a while
by
to get
his
going
mom.
in his career,
It
too.
really did, even when he was in the NBA. So he's kind of that guy that you look to and say he's made a lot of himself on and off the court. So maybe he can be that leader. I'll just kind of echo a story that
Udonis Haslem, Sap. He's in his 55th year with the Miami Heat.
Yeah, he's older than I am. I think he, was playing against Bill Russell at some point when, in the 60s. That type of player. But again, that's not as easy as it sounds, right? Because if you remember, I'll keep it close to home, Tyler Sagan spent his first 3 years in Boston, and there were some issues with him apparently He was showing up to practice with alcohol on his breath, wasn't changing clothes, was having some affairs with other players' wives, to the point where after 3 years they moved on from him. And I think he's kind of matured somewhat while he's been in Dallas. So look, if you're 21 years old and you're making a lot of money and women love you, and you played really well in the postseason last year in the bubble, you think your shit's ice cream. And now it's time to get to that next level where you want to continue to improve as a player, but be a professional. And it sounds like Tyler Herro is going through some of that. And that organization is usually pretty good at handling that stuff. Again, led by Pat Riley, and I think having a player like Jimmy Butler. But you know what? You would think the Bruins had a good organization. You had someone like Zdeno Chara who could literally crush, Tyler Seguin in his bare hands. But you sometimes can't get through these guys. They've got a guaranteed contract, and they're not mature enough to handle the responsibility that comes with being a star.
Right. Yeah. You can't, force the guy to do something if he's not willing to do it. You can't babysit him. He's an adult. 21 is an adult, despite what some people might think. Jimmy Butler can't put him under house arrest. So he can't, physically restrain him from going out and partying if that's what Tyler Herro is doing. I think it's a combination, Sap, of I certainly could see this being a case where, everybody was watching him because there was nothing else to do during last summer, really. There were lockdowns and stuff, so there were a lot of eyes on the NBA. He played very, very well. He made it to the finals. He had that moment where he was like, mean mugging, and that became a meme. He's a handsome young guy, and he's got a lot of this recognition, and I'm sure that he's enjoyed the fame trappings that come with being an NBA player, especially an NBA player who is starting to get a higher profile, who lives in Miami.
Who happens to be white also, right? So that makes him stand out a little bit more, right? So all of a sudden, because I think NBA fans are hoping for the great white hope.
Yeah, no, it's a great white hope mentality, exactly like you said.
Yeah, because the best white players in the NBA are from Europe. They're not from the United States. I mean, the last white guy from the United States to win an MVP was Larry Bird in 1986. I mean, Steve Nash from Canada, Dirk Nowitzki from Germany, and eventually Luka Doncic is going to win an MVP, and this year Nikola Jokic is going to win an MVP, but not from the United States. So I think everybody's kind of looking for, this is pretty cool. As a white guy who can shoot, who athletic. He's not just a shooter. I'll compare him because another player that went to Kentucky that was going to fill that gap was Rex Chapman. 30 years ago, he was going to be the great white hope, and he had some injuries and other concerns, and it didn't materialize. But yeah, so there's a lot on this young kid's plate. And how he reacts to it, it can make or break his career going forward.
I'm wondering if it's the case of the Heat maybe overreacting a little bit to, a guy being a normal 21-year-old because maybe the expectations were too high based off of his performance in the bubble. I mean, again, he was a lottery pick, but he was a late lottery pick. So it's not like this guy came into the NBA with the expectation of being an all-star level or a superstar level player. And maybe now he's playing a little bit, maybe, water has found its level, Sap. Is that possible?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this isn't Zion Williamson from that same draft. I mean, Zion is a superstar already, and I think it's going to be the face of this league in 3 or 4 years. He kind of flew under the radar, did Tyler Herro. He actually moved up the draft board that night. It was kind of a surprise that Miami took him. I know the Celtics were interested. Of course, Celtics appear to be interested in everybody that they don't get.
Yeah, as long as they are good. If they're bad, they're not interested.
They're not interested. No, not at all. We're not interested in that player because apparently he's not good. And I believe Herro went one pick before the Celtics took Romeo Langford,
yes.
Right? So I mean, and Herro even not
went
playing
13.
That great this year
That's
in Miami
Herro
is better than Romeo Langford. So yeah, again, he probably outperformed where he was drafted last year. They made it to the finals, which was a shocker, right? No one thought the Miami Heat, who were a 5 seed, were going to make it all the way to the finals. They got there, and they played the Lakers tougher than anybody else played the Lakers, because the Lakers won their first 3 rounds all in 5 games, and Miami did take them to 6, although it was never really a series. But yeah, so he was all the rage in that bubble last year, and now he comes back a couple of months later. It wasn't a long off season. So he obviously thinks he's maybe better than he is. And sometimes you have that sophomore slump. It humbles you. And then, the next year you find yourself and start to improve as a player and become more mature. That's what you hope.
Yeah, well, where he really made his sort of presence known was that Eastern Conference Final Series against
Mhm.
Boston. He had in Game 4 a 37-point game where he was just drilling everything, and he looked like, I think he was the youngest player to put up that many points in a playoff series.
Mhm.
Uh, and so it looked like he was an emerging star. But I do feel like there's a reason why players sometimes drop in the draft, and it's not always
Mhm.
sometimes you miss scout it, but Hero is an American player who played at Kentucky, so people got a pretty good look at him, and there's a reason why he wasn't the top 3 pick. So I think some of his flaws as a player have come out more this season, and the
Mhm.
expectation coming off of like what was a tremendous performance in the conference finals, and then he was pretty good in the NBA finals. Sap, he had he had a 20-point game, a couple of 17-point games. I mean, he
Mhm.
wasn't a world beater, but he was a solid contributor. He was playing 30 plus minutes every night as a rookie in the NBA finals, which is almost unheard of for rookies to be playing in the NBA finals, especially logging that many minutes. But I think people started to get the assumption that this guy was a no doubt superstar in the making. And I think that those expectations were not necessarily realistic based off of the whole skill set of the player. His numbers have dropped percentage wise this year. His scoring is up slightly, probably because he took him a while to get going, and he was probably amassing some, I don't know off the top of my head, but some DNPs at the beginning of the season being a rookie. So he's at 14.8 points per game this year, Sap, which is up from 13.5 last year. The real concerning number, I guess, for the Heat are these two numbers, is that his 3-point percentage has dipped from 39%, which is outstanding, to 33%, which is around league average. And his free throw percentage has dropped from 87% to 81%. I don't really know what to make of that. The 3-point one, I think, it kind of fluctuates. 39 I mean, that's usually the guys who are the best in the league shoot around between 39 and 41%. It seems unrealistic to expect somebody to do that every year.
Maybe he's a 36% shooter. That's where he'll find his level, right? So it was a little bit higher last year, a little bit lower this year. Next year he's at 36%. Maybe that's what he is, which is good, not great. Free throw shooting, 87 to 81. Is he a player who goes to the line a lot? I mean, it could be the case of, 4 or 5 misses can alter your percentage. The other
Yeah,
thing
he's
is,
not.
right. So, I mean, it's not a guy, we're not talking about James Harden or going to the line 12 to 13 times a game. He's more of a perimeter player. He's more of a deep shooter. So he's not going to go to the line all that much. And also, let's not forget, going back into the playoffs last year, we had the reentry into the bubble. And into the bubble, there were no fans in the stands. Now, again, we're not playing in front of packed houses this year, but there are some fans in the stands. Let's say if he comes to TD Garden, there's going to be 2,500 people there, which shouldn't impact the player, but it could, him being so young. So there's a lot of variables there. It's not like he's gone from 87% at the free throw line to 72. At that point, you'd say maybe this guy needs to get his eyes checked or something, right?
Yeah.
So I think it might be a slight overreaction, but that organization is very proactive, right? They're not one to just sit back and let things go. So I think that may have something to do with it. If he was playing elsewhere, we may not have heard so much about this. And maybe the story is leaked. And I always believe that when some story is leaked, it's leaked for a reason, is to kind of get in his ear. And I think Pat Riley essentially saying, young guy, wise up. You've got talent, but you got to take it more seriously.
What's the ceiling in your opinion for him, Sap? Because people were saying Ray Allen after last year's postseason. I mean, that's up until Steph Curry came around. Ray Allen was the best shooter of all time, and is a Hall of Famer. So that's a lofty comparison. Do you see it? Do you see him reaching an All Star level?
Maybe once. There's always those guys that you look and say, oh, wow, that guy made the All Star team at one point. I remember Byron Scott made one All Star game and Danny Ainge made one All Star game. Now, it may have been helped that they played for the Lakers and the Celtics. And look, Miami's a pretty high profile team as well. Yeah, he may crack the All Star team one time in his career. I could see him being maybe a 17-point per game scorer. I think he's a liability on defense, which, again, that's not going to change the fact if he's a star or not. I mean, Steph Curry's not a real good defender, but obviously everybody wants to see him play as he's throwing up 35 footers and hitting 50% of them. So, yeah, I think his ceiling's probably 17, 18 points per game. Not Ray Allen. No, Ray Allen is, as you said before, Steph Curry, you can make a case Ray Allen's the greatest shooter that we've seen. And also, Ray Allen was a guy who'd go to the basket. He also rebound and pass and play decent defense. I mean, Ray Allen was an accomplished player. A guy that went to the All-Star game pretty much every year, especially in his prime.
Yeah, and was the best player on
I
a
think
couple
he could be.
teams.
I mean, Ray Allen's a top 100 player. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, yeah.
that's probably being conservative, but yeah, he's a top 100 player. Maybe like somewhere in the 80s. I have my top 30 list. He's nowhere near close to that. That's reserved for the greats of the greats. But yeah, I'd say he's probably a top 80, top 90 player. That I don't see Tyler Herro eventually being that guy, but he can be a really nice piece on a contending team.
Yeah, so I do think overall this story, it's a mix of the expectations got out of control
Right.
for what he could be, because he's not JJ Redick or Kyle Korver, where he's just a 3-point shooter. I think that's why the expectations got a little out of control, is that you saw him take the ball to the basket
Right.
a couple of times, have a couple of dunks. He could do a little bit more than those guys, right? They're not just saying sit out on the perimeter, just shoot threes. So I think people were looking at it and saying, oh, he
Yeah.
can shoot threes and do this.
Well, I know, and we both follow Rex Chapman on Twitter, and I've got to reach out to Rex Chapman and Kendrick Perkins to get them on the podcast, because I think one way to get traction on the podcast is get former players to say crazy shit, and then
Yes.
people will find out about us, right? The way Gary Payton went on a recent podcast and talked about something that's near and dear to my heart that we're going to talk about momentarily. But Rex Chapman is a pretty good comparison to Tyler Herro. Rex was a better athlete than Tyler Herro. Rex Chapman was regularly in dunk contests. He was 6'4". He could just jump through the roof. He was kind of a streaky shooter as well, like Tyler Herro. So that's kind of the comparison. More athletic than certainly Kyle Korver and even JJ Redick. So there's a little variance to his game. But again, young guy living in a city that is a really cool place to live. And again, as much as you can have leaders on that team, whether it's through the coaching staff, and I think more so through the players, look, young guys aren't easy to lasso in and make sure that they stay focused. They've got to mature sometimes on their own.
Yeah, I totally believe the story that he's, probably spending some late nights at clubs in Miami, because
Sure.
Florida's been open for months now, and is probably not taking basketball as seriously as he should be or could be. So I think that there's definitely something to the story, but I also think you have to take it that maybe the Heat and a lot of fans were being unrealistic with what the expectation of him should be, and they were talking about him as like, oh, well, we can't, include Tyler Herro in a trade for James Harden or something like that, as an untouchable guy, where he's not that. He's not.
No, he's never going to reach what Jaylen Brown is. Jaylen Brown's a better athlete, better defender, more versatile player, and obviously a much more mature guy. Like I pictured Jaylen Brown being totally focused on basketball. In fact, you almost have to say to Jaylen at some point, maybe just lighten up a little bit. He's so intense, but I love that part about his game. So yeah, I mean, his ceiling is only so high, but he is playing on a high profile team, and he got a lot of traction by playing in the finals last year.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with Tyler Herro and the Heat. The Heat continue to be disappointing this year, Sap. Currently, they're the 7th seed in the East, which puts them in that play-in spot. They're 30-28, 9.5 games back of the Sixers, who are in first place. Nowhere near where I think people were expecting. I think people were expecting Miami to be a top 3 team in the East this year, and they haven't. I mean, since the tip-off of the season, they haven't even approached that.
No. I mean, they probably will end up making it to the second round because you think they're better than the Celtics, perhaps. But I don't even buy into that.
It depends where they're seated.
In that same group. Yeah, it depends where they're seated. If they get into the play-on and are the 7 play-in tournament and they're the 7 seed, then you're playing Brooklyn and good luck.
Right. So it all depends who Miami's matchup is, and Tyler Herro. I don't know if he's going to be a big part of their future or what. They might decide to trade him. Maybe getting him out of Miami is a good thing for his future. I don't know, but we'll keep an eye on this story because it is interesting about a guy who is, was so high profile at the end of last season and has had definitely a sophomore slump of a year. So if anything else comes out of that story, we'll definitely talk about that. But I know a story you want to get to, Sap, because you get very, very excited, and your table starts to rise wherever you're sitting as you hear these types of stories. Gary Payton, one of my favorite all-time players, has said
Mhm.
this: LeBron James is by far the better all-around player than Michael Jordan, angering all fans of 90s basketball. And Sap, I'm sure you were just happy as a clam today.
I've been smiling for hours since Gary Payton said this. Now, I don't agree with Gary Payton that he's much greater than Michael Jordan. I think that's kind of crazy. I think LeBron James is the greatest player in the history of the game. I think Michael Jordan is the second greatest player in the history of the game. And it's a difficult comparison because their games are different. You know, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant were essentially the same player. Jordan just better than Kobe. LeBron truly is a unicorn, right? I mean, he's got some Magic Johnson in his game. He's got Karl Malone's body. He's got Michael Jordan's athleticism. He's got magic in Bird's mind. I mean, he's kind of like the perfect basketball player. This surprised me, though, because generally players that played against Jordan always will put Jordan above LeBron because it makes them feel better about themselves.
Sure,
And
yeah.
it kind of brings up their Q rating, right? So Gary Payton, if he was going to go in a different direction, could say, hey, look, I lost to Michael Jordan. If not for Jordan, maybe I'd have a championship or two. LeBron's playing in a softer era. That's what all those guys from the 90s continually say, whether it's Barkley or Pippen or whoever else. This surprised me because, you know, normally you stick with the guy from your era. So that was a pleasant surprise. And we do remember a year ago during the Last Dance, there was part of it where Gary Payton, you know, talked about the NBA Finals in 1996, and the Bulls won the first three games, and finally George Karl decided to put Gary Payton on Michael Jordan mano a mano. Like, why wouldn't you put the best defensive player in the sport at the time, which Gary Payton was, on the best player in the sport at that point? That would make some sort of sense. Well, in the final three games of that series, games 4, 5, and 6, that's what the Sonics did. And here are the numbers that Jordan put up in games 4, 5, and 6 in the 1996 finals. And this is all with Gary Payton covering him. Held him to 22 for 60 from the floor, which is 37%. 1 of 9 for 3, that's 11%. Averaged 22.7 points per game, which is essentially 10 points below his career playoff average. 5.3 rebounds, 3.3 assists, and an average of 4 turnovers per game. And Payton said, I did a really good job locking up Michael Jordan. Remember Michael Jordan looking at the iPad and like laughing, like no one shut me down. Well, Gary Payton did a damn good job in those 3 games. If they had Payton on Michael Jordan early in the series, maybe it would have been different. Probably not. That was the 72-10 Bulls team. They were going to win the championship. But Payton did have a point which everybody laughed about. Good for Gary Payton to say this. Now, again, there's 2 ways this works, right, Jet? You would think that Gary Payton, because he played against Michael Jordan, would side with Jordan over LeBron. But what better way to get your name out there than to say something completely by surprise and say that LeBron's better than Jordan?
That's true. If he had just said Jordan's better, nobody's talking about it, right?
No one would talk about it. And I remember a couple of years ago, Pippen said LeBron was greater than Jordan, and then he backtracked. You know, he played with Jordan. Obviously, they won 6 championships together. But in some strange way, Pippen might be saying, well, I want to minimize Jordan because it would maximize me.
It helps him.
There's a lot going on with this. And we all do this, right? Like, I'll go through and say, look at the guys LeBron played with compared to the guys that Durant has played with. It's not even close, because I want to make my point
Skip
stronger.
Bayless says the same thing.
He's a master of this.
Tries to make Kyrie Irving seem like the greatest player of all time, and Dwayne Wade seem like, they're both top 10 players, and that, if not for them, LeBron would, never even made it out of the first round of the playoffs.
He doesn't think LeBron deserves any titles. Last year was the bubble. Ray Allen saved them in one finals against San Antonio. Kyrie saved them in another finals against Golden State in 2016. I mean, forgets to talk about that, John Paxson and Steve Kerr hit huge shots in the finals as well. But, let that go.
No, Skip is right, the master of it.
He's the master, and he's making $8.5 million a year. God bless him.
Yeah, and he'll make it seem like, Aaron Rodgers is basically has a team full of Pro Bowlers on offense,
right.
And Tom Brady's played with, the Little Sisters of the Poor. So he's great at it. There's obviously, he's a troll, so you have to take it.
Absolutely, we all are at some point, right? I mean,
but I think the Payton thing, Sap, is Jordan doesn't have the greatest relationship with all of his contemporaries. I mean,
no,
I don't think he's the most well-liked person.
No, not at all.
His friends are his friends. Like, he's got his crew. But, like, you've seen, like, he was best friends with Charles Barkley. They don't speak anymore because Jordan couldn't deal with it. And so, I'm sure Payton looks at this to some extent. It's like, screw this guy. He's insulted me. I'm going to take a shot at him. I don't know if Payton truly believes that, but it's certainly, he doesn't lose anything by saying this.
No, and we're talking about him. Like I said, if he had said, "Oh, Jordan's better than LeBron," no one would really bat an eye. The thing is, too, that I think the players from that era respect Jordan incredibly. I don't think they necessarily like him or even associate with him
No.
right now. Like you said, Barkley was one of his closest friends. They don't even speak anymore. But also, I think they're scared shit of Michael Jordan for whatever reason. Again, I always think of Jordan, Kobe, and Tom Brady, of three guys who I would classify as sociopaths. On the court or off the court, these guys were just unhinged. I don't think they really adapted well to society at some point. Kobe,
No,
I
Brady
think,
refuses to adapt to society. He's just going to keep playing. He doesn't want to even try.
Who keeps playing football at that advanced age. And Jordan, I don't think he's been able to recapture the competitiveness that he had when he played. He owns a team, but what can you do as the owner? You can't go play.
Golfs a lot.
Gambles. He does golf a lot, and he gambles and smokes cigars and drinks whatever he drinks, and looks like he's having the time of his life. He's worth $2 billion. God bless him. But this was interesting, and again, give Payton credit for going where a lot of Jordan's contemporaries don't want to go, because I think, quite frankly, they are frightened of the guy. But Payton has a fearless attitude. He did on the court, and he certainly does off the court.
Yeah, so this was on an interview he did with Scoop B. Robinson. And Payton went on to say, after saying, I think LeBron's a better all-around player, he said, LeBron does everything. He passes the ball better than Jordan, can dribble it, I think, a little bit better than Jordan. Shooting-wise, I don't think so. Rebounding, I think he did better, but Jordan did rebound. So, if you're looking at it from the metric of what makes a good basketball player and taking into account all these statistics and stuff, and you're just going head-to-head, and I know we've done this a million times, and we'll do it a million more times, there's certain categories where no-brainer you can put LeBron, ahead of Jordan. Obviously, he's a better rebounder and passer. I think that's. I don't know how you could make a debate about either of those things.
No, and as far as a defender, I'd give Jordan the edge as a defender. I think LeBron's a more versatile defender. He can guard pretty much anybody on the court. And also, let's not forget that when Jordan was considered the best defender in the NBA for 7 or 8 years, he actually wasn't even the best defender on his team. That was Scottie Pippen. So Jordan didn't have to check the other team's best player. It was generally Scottie Pippen that did that. Whereas LeBron, even now at an advanced age, we saw in the bubble last year, Donovan Mitchell was going off against the Lakers. Well, down the stretch of certain games, LeBron checked him and shut him down. LeBron's not necessarily a scorer, but he's averaged 27 points per game during his career. That's pretty impressive for a guy who's not necessarily a scorer that does so much. I've always compared the two in a sense to Michael Jordan is Michael Jackson. Like, it's just an incredibly huge star, incredibly entertaining, so proficient, tons of Grammy Awards. LeBron James is more Prince. And I think Prince was a better musician than Michael Jackson. So that's the way I kind of compare them. But Prince was never as popular as Michael Jackson, but I think a more talented musician. That can be the case. Both things can be true.
Yeah, and I'm talking about, just going straight down the line for basketball, like Payton, I think, was trying to do there. And yeah, I'd say Jordan was the better defender. LeBron has gone through large periods of seasons where he's not been engaged at all on defense. And Jordan did seem to bring it all every night defensively. And, that's more, I think, a personality thing than anything. Jordan, definitely the better pure shooter, I would say, pure jump shooter.
Yeah, LeBron better at going to the basket because of his sheer size. Yeah, better passer. I don't think that's
arguable. That's not a debate.
Skip Bayless claims Jordan was a better passer than LeBron James.
That's
when you know he's in full troll mode.
5 best passers ever.
Yeah, I mean, put him up there with the point guards because he could play the point
5
position.
to 10 best ever, without question.
And certainly non-guards, he's clearly the best. The only guy in his league is Larry Bird. And I think LeBron's a better rebounder. Again, he's a bigger, stronger guy. So, yeah, but and look, the debate's going to rage on for years. I mean, the two best sports debates of this century are who meant more to the Patriots, Belichick or Brady, and who's greater, LeBron, Michael Jordan. round one went to Tom Brady. Obviously, Tampa Bay won a Super Bowl, and the Patriots went 7-9. The Jordan LeBron debate is never going to end. And I always kind of painted it as this, Jet. I think people feel that Jordan was better. Those who pick LeBron, we think that he was better. And there's a difference there. One's more emotional. The other one is a little bit more analytical.
Trying to say you're smarter than everybody else is what you're trying to say.
Yes, me, Nick Wright, Shannon Sharp. We're the three smartest guys in the country.
Yeah, the three wise men.
Yes.
That's the group. Yeah, you should always just defer to those three for
my guys.
Any sort of advice or sage wisdom. Yes. Everybody always, because when you think Nick Wright, you think wise.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, Sap, I was definitely surprised by it too. It's always going to be a debate, as you said. It's a fun debate. There's never going to be a definitive winner because you can't have a definitive winner. But Gary Payton being the guy who said it is interesting. I'm not sure if he actually believes it, if it's a troll, but it does create an interesting story.
One final note, too, is I like the fact that it's a debate. I really get turned off when people go, no, it's not a debate. Like, okay, we won't discuss who I think are the two greatest players in the history of the sport. I think every sport has debates. Everyone thinks Wayne Gretzky's the greatest hockey player of all time. I think it's Mario Lemieux. We all agree.
You don't have
Tom
many
Brady.
people who agree with you on that one, by the way.
No, but I mean, I've done articles on it. I'll debate anybody that wants to go there. I'll go through why I think that's the case. But it's not like I picked, Michael Ryder, who was a third line wing on the Bruins 10 years ago, and said, well, he's actually better than Wayne Gretzky. I picked Mario effing Lemieux, who, I've talked to players who played with both guys who said Lemieux was better. So I'm kind of basing it on that.
Yeah. That's another topic for a hockey show that I will not be a part of.
Yes. In the Corner podcast. How's that sound?
When I did hockey for a couple of weeks when we were at the Herald, I determined I was a goaltending expert, and I now have just focused on goaltending. I don't want to talk about any other aspect of hockey ever, except for goaltending. I know goaltending like the back of my hand, Sap.
We'll have to call it the In the Crease podcast with Jet and Sap.
Where we only talk about goalies. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented, as always, by Full Press Coverage. Check out their website, fullpresscoverage.com, for this podcast, other great podcasts, articles, you name it, they got it. You can find us on iTunes. Please download the podcast. Search for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Search for the full name. That's how you'll find it. Remember to subscribe to it. And if you can, this would be really great. If you could rate it, 5-star rating, say that you liked it, comment that you liked it. That helps us tremendously. Comment in the YouTube. That also helps us. YouTube.com/JetStryer. Stay for Sap's awesome tripod and blue background and my background full of pictures. We just appreciate all you guys watching, guys and girls watching and participating with us. Thank you to everybody. And we will be back later with another podcast. See you, everybody.